Hi, I'm Steve. You can call me Steve. I like bread. Sandwiches, bagels, buns, pasta too. Anything made from wheat, basically. Wheat is the staple grain crop of European and European-derived cultures, so it's in a lot of the foods I grew up eating. If I had celiac disease, I'd be in trouble, because that's an inability to digest a whole collection of proteins found in wheat that are collectively called gluten. Most of the proteins in wheat fall under the gluten banner. They're found in other grains too, like oats or barley, but I'm going to talk mainly about wheat. Gluten is natural. Remember, the distinction between natural and artificial is entirely artificial. Gluten is produced by the wheat plant and has not been subjected to any genetic modifications other than 8,000 years of cultivation and crossbreeding by farmers. Okay, enough soapboxing. What exactly does this stuff do? When you're baking and you make dough, gluten is what holds that mass together. It's also extracted from wheat and used as protein supplements for vegetarians, and also to make fake meat. It's the go-to plant-based protein, and it's extremely common in a lot of Western foods. It turns up as an additive in everything from beer to ketchup to cosmetics. It's extremely common, which makes it very difficult for people with celiac disease or other gluten sensitivities. Classic symptoms of celiac disease include chronic diarrhea and gastric distress, as well as various forms of malnutrition. But most celiac sufferers don't have these symptoms. Most people have a host of other symptoms completely unrelated to their digestive system and frequently go undiagnosed. Celiac is a lifelong condition and can currently only be treated with a gluten-free diet. Gluten sensitivity, on the other hand, is a blanket term for a variety of ailments that go away when gluten is removed from the diet. It's not one specific disease, it's just a catch-all term for a bunch of unrelated things that just have this one thing in common. And that makes it very difficult to make broad statements about it. Sometimes it's permanent, sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it can be relieved by going gluten-free, sometimes not. It hasn't yet been exhaustively studied, so there are still a lot of question marks surrounding it. So how common are these diseases? More than they used to be, especially in areas that traditionally haven't used wheat as their staple cereal crop. Those areas are now embracing wheat and seeing a rise in people experiencing adverse reactions to something they previously haven't been constantly exposed to. Celiac affects 1% to 2% of the global population, and that number includes both traditional and non-traditional symptoms. Gluten sensitivity affects anywhere from 0.5% to 6% of the population, depending on who you ask. The numbers are so vague because so many people self-diagnose as being gluten sensitive, whether they really are or not. Some of them probably are. Others are probably getting caught up in a fad. Gluten sensitivity is currently a very popular disease to pretend to have, which does no favors to those who genuinely have it. If you think you have celiac or some other gluten-related ailment, don't go gluten-free on your own. See a doctor first and get a medical opinion. It will take extensive testing to get a proper diagnosis, but it's better to have a real answer than to just make assumptions. Now, I understand that getting a proper diagnosis can sometimes be nearly impossible, especially if you live in the States and don't have access to the dystopian train wreck that passes for a medical system there. Even in Canada, where I live, getting an appointment with a specialist can take months, and test results can take almost as long to come back, and getting a final diagnosis can take several rounds of back and forth like that. Still, it's worth going through the process, assuming you can find a doctor who will take your concerns seriously. That's gluten. It's a protein found in wheat and other grains which some people have an adverse reaction to. Those reactions can range in severity from showing absolutely no symptoms up to chronic diarrhea and malnutrition, and in extreme rare cases, brain damage. Sometimes symptoms will make themselves known later in life because there's a threshold of damage that needs to occur to the lining of your stomach before you realize you have celiac disease. The usual treatment is to switch to a gluten-free diet. If you think you have some sort of gluten sensitivity, don't simply declare yourself gluten-free. Get a medical opinion first, before you switch diets, because eliminating gluten before seeing a doctor can complicate the process of diagnosing you. People self-diagnosing is what has contributed to the perception of gluten sensitivity being a fad. It is a real condition, but too many people have embraced it for unjustified reasons, which makes it harder for people who really have it to be taken seriously. Thanks for watching. I've been Steve.